12/10 of 19, copies of which are in the packets. Any revisions or adjustments to the minutes necessary? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve.
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Motion by Nutting, is there a second? Second by Smith. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
No,
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed, so the minutes are approved. Item number 2 is discussion and possible action regarding sole source purchase for asbestos abatement at Great Lakes Cheese at 101 DeVoe Street, their former location. And you've got some sole source documentation in the packets, I believe from Tammy Stratz on that item. Tammy is with us. Does anyone have questions for her on the sole source or on the abatement? If not, is there a motion? Do you have a question, Mike? or-
I got one question.
Okay.
Just trying to, and then I'll make the motion.
Okay.
But, yeah, reading through the documents, is this, it sounds like the abatement has already started, and this was some additional remediation that had to be done?
Correct.
Okay.
What happened is, when we did the initial inspection, we put it out, I called for bids. Mabel was the one who was selected and the only one who responded. And then after the work started, more suspects materials were discovered because as the deconstruction was happening. So at that point, we had to kind of stop and try to figure out what was the additional work that needed to be done. The DNR was there because it's a bigger project, and they helped work with us to try to figure out the most economical way of doing it, and that's where the change order came into.
So the sole source is really an ongoing project. It's part of an ongoing project.
It is done now.
Okay.
But to allow the same vendor to do both tasks?
Correct.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
And I think just for clarification, I think when Tammy got her first quote, it was about $14,000, right? And so because it fell under that 25,000, she said bid, but they weren't sealed bids. It was a, more of an informal quote, and she had only gotten one. And so, at that point, she felt like she was okay to proceed. She hadn't filled out a sole source form, but then, once it came time to pay the bill and it was $35,000, then she, I think
The panic
realized,
came,
okay,
yeah.
yes.
Right.
Okay, now we're way over our 25,000. So
Right.
it's really
Well, and the work needs done either
just
way,
some
so.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to be transparent
Sure.
that the expense is what it is, and we only had one proposer.
Correct.
That makes sense now, so I so move.
Okay. Motion
accept.
to approve the sole source, is there a second? Second by Lawrence. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. Item number 3 is discussion and possible action regarding modification of the procurement policy. You've got some documentation from Mary Ann and from the Assistant City Attorney in the packets about the procurement policy. For a number of years now, we've had it in our policy that to expedite small purchases, we don't require documentation or committee approval, et cetera, on purchases that are under $5,000. That allows staff to be able to make small incidental purchases to get the job done or solve problems without having to go through a committee process or wait on the purchasing to get those items handled. I think our intent here is to clarify the policy so that the policy reads the way it has always been applied, so that our methods and our procedure match. I guess, Mary Ann, do you want to walk us through that a little bit, or as far as how the policy has been used?
Sure, so historically, when I drafted the policy, the goal, as Lisa said, was for purchases under $5,000, that we were encouraging departments to look competitively at their purchases, but there was no formal procedure required, and there was no procurement documentation required. Once it's over $5,000, they have a lot of, I guess, red tape to go through. They have to obtain a purchase order. They have to follow and get at least 3 quotes. Those quotes have to accompany the purchase order. If they're not going to get those 3 quotes, they have to submit a sole source. And so there's, quite a bit of documentation. And then if you go over from 5,000 to 25,000, then there's even more procedures because now you're in a bidding situation. So, historically, the education that I've been passing on to the departments is if you're under $5,000, do the best you can for the taxpayers, but you don't have to go through a lot of documentation to support your decisions. And that included if they chose to sole source. So with the changes that we're making here, we're just clarifying that in addition to not having procurement documentation, they don't need any sole source documentation if it's under 5,000. So again, if somebody's going to buy a board for $10 at Menards because they need a 2x4, well, they're probably $4.94 or something, but still, they don't have to put something in a file that says, I didn't go to Home Depot and I didn't go to Modern Builders because this is why. They just can go get a board for $4.94 because by the time they would put all of that in the file, they would probably have spent $5 or $10 of administrative time, because then you have to do something with that sheet of paper, you have to follow up on it, you have to figure out when you can throw it away, whether it should be imaged, that just, it's a large
It's a lot of
snowball
minutia for a
that-
small
yes.
purchase. Yep, yep.
So we're just clarifying that if it's under 5,000, the departments get to make their decisions on purchasing. We're encouraging them to do the best they can for the taxpayers, but they don't need any documentation. They certainly need an invoice to get, to pay the bill, but that would be all they would need.
So there's documentation for the expense, it's just that it's not going through a sole source process.
Right.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion then to approve that policy adjustment so it matches our common practice?
I'll make that motion, Madam
Motion by
Chair.
Nutting, is there a second? Second by Martins. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries as well. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action regarding the authorizing the modification of fees to the City of Wausau fees and license schedule adopted pursuant to Wausau Municipal Code, Section 3.040.010, Sub A, relating to open records request copies. And you've got some documentation there as well about a fee adjustment. Does anyone have questions there?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
move to
Mike.
approve.
Okay, let's take the motion in a second, then we'll get Mike's question.
Yep, that's fine.
So we have a motion by Dave Nutting, is there a second? Second by Lawrence, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I guess my question, I see is the existing fee was 25 cents a page, and this is correct, the new fee is going to be 3/10 of a cent for color and 4/100 of a cent for a black and white page?
Yeah, I think this came from the attorney's office, so I'm not really sure what is generating the change. I would assume they're
Was it a state requirement?
recovering
Oh, excuse
our
me.
actual cost. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
3.5 cents per color page and 4/10 of a cent for black and white page. So is that, yeah,
Yep, Ann's nodding in the back, so yes, that's where we'd be going.
okay, so I'm.
So it reflects our actual cost more so than than the rate that we had traditionally charged, which seemed excessive, I guess, under the regulation, is that?
Nate Miller of our office worked with Jerry Klein directly on this, because Jerry and I have been talking for a long time about how a quarter a page is borderline, like we've been threatened by media outlets for that high charge in our ordinance, and they don't want to pay it, they don't like to pay it, and they've told us that it's not in line with the AG's recommendations. And there was an opinion that came out not too long ago that they charge even less than this. And so they said anybody that's charging a quarter or more per page, that's specious and you should challenge it, and so on and so forth. So while it's a little change, it's just a number, it's been on our radar for a long time to make sure that we amend it to something that reflects administrative reality. And so we needed to rely on IT to tell us really what the cost per page was for them to duplicate pages if somebody wanted a hard copy. So I believe Jerry provided the numbers.
Okay,
Perfect. Okay,
that's really good rates.
that is good rates.
Yeah,
And that should be good news to people who are requesting records, that they'll be less expensive going forward and more reflective of true costs. So we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? If not, seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries as well. Item number 5 is discussion and possible action regarding sole source purchase for planning services for the North Riverfront and a related budget modification. We've got, let's see, I think this is coming from Chris Schock. You've got some documentation in the packets on this one as well. Does anyone have questions for Director Schock on this item? We can bring him up if so. Go ahead, okay, Dennis will, come on up, Chris.
Hello there, Chris.
World traveler.
It's true.
It's true.
Back just for this fun.
Okay, we
Where
are,
else can you have this much fun?
I know, right?
we are voting on tonight just for consulting services, or exactly what we voting on tonight? I see a developer's agreement in here that talks about what we're gonna do and what the developer's gonna do, so exactly, I'm unclear as to exactly what we're voting on tonight.
Sure, so two separate things. One is the North Riverfront area, which is the area north of Wausau Avenue, separate item from the River Life development,
All right,
which
good.
is,
I appreciate that. Chris, try and tell me exactly where this is going. I get confused kind of going down that corridor. Is this close to Wisconsin Cheese, or past Wisconsin Cheese, or on the south side of Wisconsin Cheese, or where it is?
yeah, good question. It is Wisconsin cheese. So it's the
Wisconsin
Great Lakes
cheese,
Cheese
okay.
Facility. You know, we RFP'd that. We received 3 proposals for the area, including 2 commercial users and a residential user. And as we were, as the Economic Development Committee was discussing it, we thought what might be valuable is, to hire a planning firm, a professional planning and engineering firm to work with the 3 proposers and staff to come up with a site plan, that unifies together. We were calling it a unifying plan that unifies together the 3 proposals, rather than selecting one of the proposals and not the others. We feel that there's, from a staff perspective, we felt there was opportunity to incorporate all 3 interested parties into the site. It's a big site, but we want to be thinking about, where the roads will go, where the stormwater will go, where parking facilities will go, how the future utility corridors will go in, and then how the different users will be placed on their sites. So that's definitely more of obviously they're going to work on their own planning related to the building and what they're going to do in it and those kind of things, but, and that's in their proposal and in their subsequent presentations that they'll make to the committees and to council. But at this stage, we thought it was a good idea to have a firm look at it. And so for a relatively minor amount of money in the scheme of things, we thought it's a good use of resources to put together a site plan to try to accommodate all the different users.
So they're going to work on a plan that would make an amalgam of the 3 proposals and so on?
Correct.
If they would work together and so on?
Exactly, a unifying plan, yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
One thing we talked about in ED is that all 3 uses were suitable and would coexist well, and they all kind of want to take flight at the same time, which is a bit of chaos. So I think to add some method to that madness, it was certainly made sense, and we supported it in ED. One use was a restaurant, the other one was a brew pub, and the other one was housing. And so, Ms. Lawrence, go ahead.
Thank you. Is there already a firm you're working with? I see it's sole source, and really we're voting to change the budget from 5,000 to 9,000. What led you to believe that we need 4,000 more to get that job done?
Well, it's really any amount. I mean, we had just amended it, but it's really a 9,000. We have some. We've gotten some feedback from firms. I'm not sure exactly what it will be, but we felt that the 9,000 would be pragmatic, to ensure that we have enough professional services with one of those firms and their time, for engineering and for other efforts to ensure that we don't have to come back and ask for more resources. So we're asking for up to 9,000. Obviously, if it was below 5,000, we wouldn't necessarily request the sole source documentation and the process, but we think it's a good project to focus on anyways. The whole North Riverfront area was actually master planned with a partnership with the UW-Madison School of Architecture and Planning. So we paid very little for the plan itself, which was an advantage and a savings in that year from a planning perspective, because we, didn't necessarily commission a large plan. We partnered with the school. That kind of laid the foundation then for the RFP process. And now we just think with the three proposers, it'll be good to have a professional firm work together with our engineering and planning staff to, consult and lay out, the whole area. We think we can do it for around that amount. We'd like to choose a firm that's knowledgeable about the riverfront area already so that they can hit the ground running and not go through the normal RFP process that we would for a public plan, because it's really not a public plan, it's really just a site plan that unifies the proposers.
Kind of a logistics type thing?
Yeah, it's really very specific about where does the road go, where does the utility go, how do the lots lay out, the vision plan's already done. Now it's really just, fitting these puzzle pieces together.
Sure.
So you don't have a firm where you're unable to agree on a price, it's just that you feel whatever was budgeted isn't adequate for the scope of what they're going to be asked to do?
Sure, yeah, I don't think anything was actually budgeted. We weren't necessarily planning to do or to need a unifying plan, but we're asking for the 9,000 just to ensure that we can, that we can get what's needed. And we may not spend 9,000, when we choose the firm.
Well, it's not every day that you have three big plans that all come at the same time that are all viable, so that's a plus.
Great.
Any additional questions? If not, seeing none then, did we take a motion yet, or no? We did not. Okay. Do we have a motion to approve? We have a motion by Lawrence. Is there a second? Second by Martins. Further discussion? Seeing none. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries as well. Item number 6 is discussion and possible action regarding the terms of the terms of development agreement for River Life condos and related developer incentives. And you'll see some renderings and some documentation in our packets for that. Last week, the ED committee recommended approval of this plan. This is Phase 2 of River Life, located south of the current area. We did some, quite a bit of work on review of the design for this plan. We do have the project owner with us in the room tonight if there's questions. We also looked at the return on investment calculations, and we looked at, those incentives as far as for amounts and for reasonableness, and we felt that they certainly met that standard in that committee. So that's why finance is now getting it for approval, because it's worked its way through the ED committee. Does anybody have questions for the project owner or for Director Schock? Okay, Dennis, you will. Which first, the owner or Chris?
Let's bring Chris up first.
Okay, come on back, Chris.
I can't understand, we just had a situation where we were debating how this property was going to be used, and now we're asked to pass along or approve the condo project. How do we know the condo project is going to work in well with the other projects that may dovetail with this one?
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. So the North Riverfront area is north of Bird Street is north of Wausau Avenue to Winton, where
Okay, so
the,
this is not in the same area of
correct.
the...
Yeah,
okay.
this area, this Phase 2 of River Life is south of Fulton Street, south of where the current building is under construction, between the current building and the eye clinic.
Okay, so this is adjacent to Wow or somewhere down in that area?
Correct, yeah, south of Wow. So you know where the eye clinic is, and you
Yep.
know where the building that's under construction, the apartment building, it's
Yeah.
in between there.
Okay.
This was a piece of land that we were holding for them with a planning option until the end of last year. Yeah.
What is our estimated, I mean, I looked at the terms here that we're supposed to approve. I see the developer is entitled to do 2 things, and the city is entitled to do 4 things. Do you have a projected payback as when we'll break even on our investment?
Well, sure. So, I mean, obviously this project is not receiving a great deal of incentive. It's has a minimum of $5 million construction value, and its incentive is, under 10% of that. So, obviously, we don't know exactly when, because we don't know what the property will assess for, but obviously it's a significant, investment and would pay, significant taxes pretty quickly. We expect that within a handful of years, it may be as soon as 3 to 5 years, the investment will be costed out and the city would be receiving 100% of the increment, depending, because obviously it maxes out at $485,000.
All right, is this in an increment district that is above water this time, or is this the one that's in below water?
So this is in TID 3, right? Yeah, so it's above water.
It's above water?
Yeah.
Okay, but not for long.
Although, but to note, it's a pay-go TIF, and that only uses a percentage of the increment that it itself creates. As you had pointed out in previous meetings, aptly, reverse TIFs do not cost the city anything, and it's increment that they're creating with their private investment. So they will build a significant facility, $5 million plus condo tower on property that's currently vacant and generating no taxable value, and, by the way, had been generating very little taxable value even before the city acquired it a decade ago. And they will use a percentage of that increment that they're creating as their incentive.
Well, if this property is generating L0 taxes now, which it is because it's probably vacant.
Correct.
And they get the income anything above what the project is, what the property is presenting now. So basically, they're going to get 100% of the taxes.
No. In the term sheet, you'll see it says 70% of the taxes until it reaches 485, which will likely be just a handful of years, again, depending on the assessment of the project. So, it's not set as to how many years it would be. It's until it reaches 485. But again, 485 is a more than fair contribution for the city to participate in on a project like this magnitude. It's very similar to the deal approved at Mountain Lanes and other, housing projects that the city has done, in the recent past.
Well, if we're going to only get 70% of the taxes and it's actually generating zero now, basically, $485,000 is a lot of money. I'm not saying that this is not a worthwhile project, because we'd
Yeah.
like to have something there. But then the city has some costs in there too. Do we know what our infrastructure cost is? We're going to have to run sewer, water, and so on and over there.
Yeah,
And then
again-
we're also giving them property for $1, which I'm sure we paid more than $1 for.
Correct, yes. That's part of the incentive as well. Obviously, the city has already acquired over a decade ago the whole area in that area. We had remediation expenses, we had infrastructure expenses, we have had other expenses as it's been a strategy of the city to reposition the riverfront. So we don't have, specifically broken down for this particular parcel the exact costs. But yes, the city has invested millions of dollars to reposition the broader riverfront as a whole. This is just one aspect of that, right? There's a $10 million apartment building under construction. There's the WOW facility. Now there's a condo project. And there will be, kind of subsequent projects in that area, given the strong momentum and the demand for housing in the city.
Well, there is a demand for housing in the city. I'm not sure all of it is high-end. I'd like to see some of our development money go to some of our more blighted areas and give those people decent housing over there, instead of putting luxury condos and high-rent apartments on the riverfront so people can stare across the river at East Bay and Graphic Packaging.
Dennis, I don't know, as you well know, the city has incentivized a variety of projects across the city, including, Thomas Street duplexes, which are more affordable and in an area of transitional, transitional
But they
qualifications,
weren't
I guess.
necessarily a blighted area. I'm talking about areas on the east side that we have some blighted areas that I'd like to see cleaned up and give people decent housing over there. Chris, I'm not saying this is a bad project.
I
But I'm
understand.
saying that we seem to be focused on the high end and leaving the other people that maybe can't afford the high end, but certainly can't afford the high end, kind of hanging in the breeze and so on. Maybe we sometimes have to make a choice. We can't do both.
Nope, that's incorrect. We do both, and we've done both multiple times. As you well know, the renovation of Savo Supply, the city acquired that property, sold it at a loss, incentivized its reconstruction as affordable housing. Those are rent-limited units.
Some of them,
and
not all of them.
Not all, but a majority. It's a LIHTC project, for Christ's sake. And the city is also, the CDA recently approved a loan for the renovation of the Landmark Apartments as well, a major investment in redoing that building, which will be affordable units. We're, of course, amenable to more affordable units. I'm glad you're a champion of, those less fortunate, and we're glad to take on those projects when it's possible or when the city can participate. Affordable housing is, by its nature, unaffordable because construction costs are what they are, and it's hard to, to put together the deal that makes that work. It often requires tax credits, whether they be low-income housing tax credits or historic tax credits or other incentives, even independent of the city's incentives. They all have to be layered together to make that work. As you know, the city's stated strategy is diversifying housing types across the spectrum. So our housing study is very clear that the city needs more high-end housing options, especially high-end rentals. And we also need more affordable housing, especially good quality rentals for people living at or just below what's considered like the Alice level of incomes. That's been well documented. Those are the types of projects that we've incentivized. We're not necessarily incentivizing all kinds of housing projects across the city, but we've chosen kind of those two perspectives to focus on. So in the North Riverfront area, we will see obviously some units that are going to be for sale. That's that unifying plan. One of the proposals is for housing. Right now on 2nd Street, the second phase of the townhouses is under construction. The first phase has sold out. As you know, those houses that it replaced were blighted in a blighted neighborhood. They were vacant properties. Many of them were foreclosures that the city acquired. This is a logical process that we go through, and we're glad to partner with you and with everyone, obviously, to do more projects like that. If you have a specific building area, developer in mind, whatever, we're glad to work on it. I just want to be clear that we have added both affordable housing units through incentives, and we have added high-end housing units through incentives during your tenure, on the council.
Well, we seem like we've added a lot more high-end than we have of the others. And that's just my opinion. Maybe you have a different opinion. I certainly would respect that. But we seem that once we develop the riverfronts, the housing there is overpopulated. Maybe we can focus on some of the blighted areas on the east side of town that need to be incentivized, as you say, to remove some of those houses and then put up some houses, and I'm sure that you'll look at that.
We certainly welcome it.
Yeah.
For sure. Ms. Lawrence?
Just two observations. One is I had occasion to read Chris's PowerPoint presentation for like an annual report or something to kind of refresh myself before the end of October. And I was actually continually impressed with what we are doing for affordable housing, because like you said, that's one thing that isn't affordable, and there aren't incentives for the city built into that. It's pure give. But we need to pay for that with tax income coming from our highest valued land in the city, some of which is downtown along the riverfront. So I think if we can, bite the bullet, and this looks like a good, preliminary developer agreement, they are not easy to get. It is not easy to find people to come and build in areas like that. So I think we increase our coffers as we can in TIF districts with high-end to continue to do what you're saying, Dennis, in the future years.
Sure.
Since we're in a good financial position.
Yeah, we'd like to see both, obviously, and I think the goal is the city should, obviously welcome developers and participate fairly with them, and I'm very confident that these deals that we've struck, including the River Life deal, the Mountain Lanes deal, the townhomes on Third Street, the duplexes on Thomas Street, and now a condo project as well on the river, is a fair way for the city to participate. You could go to any constituent and say, does it make sense for the city to participate at these percentages, given the magnitude of what that will bring from a tax perspective? And that's just the tax revenue alone. We're not even talking about the other effects of having homeowners living along the riverfront, living downtown, and what that means for the competitiveness of the city. I think, as you know, the economic development plan for the broader region called out specifically riverfront redevelopment and housing as, important for the entire Wausau metro region. And, I'm confident we do. We are doing our work to stay competitive with peer cities, which also incentivize housing projects, and at much higher percentages, frankly. I mean, we're doing what we can do. We're lucky to have developers who are willing to make this work without what I would consider higher incentives that you would find in other communities.
Well, I think it bears repeating also that in the realm of the other housing types, ED Committee just authorized an RFP to offer up the remaining remnants on the east side of Thomas Street. Part of what we liked about the North Riverfront Housing Project was that it has a different appeal in terms of ownership or rental, that it's targeted to appeal perhaps to empty nesters, would certainly rent or sell at a different price point than what the stuff to the south would. And, for people who don't, maybe don't want to have a two-story house anymore, that may be something appealing. We also have got some new housing going up along Sherman Street on some remnants that's supposed to sell at a smaller price point as well, to kind of fill some of that gap in the middle. So, I think that we've got a decent mix. It's just a matter of, now we've got one project at hand, but I think over the spectrum of what we've considered in the last few years, we have a pretty good mix.
Yeah, and I hope there's more coming too, so.
Mr. Nutting, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
then Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. My thoughts being shared on here are related to Alderperson Lawrence as well as Alderperson Smith. What would be helpful is what you have told us is very helpful to be reminded again, and if maybe you could publish this, go down for the last, ever since I've been serving on council since 2005-06, we've done some considerable projects, and some that were even controversial projects that for housing that would fit the average person's budget, and locations that we would love to have it, but yet the neighbors didn't want it. Right over at Wausau East, the old East area, those beautiful places that were put up, which look historic for the neighborhood. And that's what's important to, to develop in a historic neighborhood, it's important to have those places look like they belong there, as opposed to something that is off, for instance, what we built along on 1st and 2nd Street, Trolley Court. It's there because it looks proper to be there. So if you could publish something for us that we could be reminded of this for the future, because sometimes it doesn't get repeated as what we've done. And following up, another question would be, on the renderings here, these renderings are really exciting to look at, and maybe this would be for you or for the developer to tell us. Do these places incorporate underground parking as opposed to surface parking? Because in past councils, some of our past council persons have stated the negative aspect of just having so much parking along this expensive riverfront area. I remember. So are these renderings as is? Is this how it's going to be built, or do we have more of these areas that could have underground parking, at least 2 parking spaces per establishment, not 1.5, because any couple that moves in there is going to have more than 1.5 cars.
Sure. So, good question. So yes, this proposal has parking basically at a half grade below below, a half story below the grade. So like the apartment building under construction now, there will be parking underneath the building.
That's important. Thank you very kindly for that
Yep,
clarification.
and I think that allows, there will still be some surface parking, but it really limits, the amount of surface parking because it really maximizes that. It's expensive to do. It costs a lot more, but it does, allow us to really maximize the value of the land with other projects then, because this building will be right up against the river and we'll maximize that. And we have the remainder of that area to also redevelop in the future as other things, townhomes or whatever comes together. So.
And a couple other things that we liked about this particular plan in ED, when we talked it over, was we wondered about the design, and so in conference with the owner and the designer of the building, they said that they had actually positioned the hallway towards the First Street side, towards the front, so that each of those units looks out at the river. And so that really makes them all highly marketable, and it really enhances the appearance, so you don't have, a lesser view on the back side for the units on the back side. They're all equally saleable or equally usable. And so we were impressed by that. We were also impressed by the creation of the amphitheater, which is a public space where all can gather. And in concert with our park department, they're going to work together on that so that that isn't just an amenity for those residents. One thing that we were always concerned about with riverfront projects is it's land that was secured by the public, and it needs to be accessible to the public, not just folks that live there. And so I think this is another step toward that where, people feel like it's their space, not just a resident's space. And it's not, separated or removed from the liveliness of the riverfront area. So that was just some of the stuff we talked about when we looked at it, too.
Having
Anyone
more
else?
housing and having owner-occupied housing, condos, is really a transformational piece to the riverfront. It brings in the exact kind of, users that you'd want to be vested in that area. So it's great we're building a high-end apartment building. It's also great that we've already developed with incentives affordable housing right on the other side of the tracks at Savo and at Trolley Quarter. And we'll continue to do that if possible, if it can work. And it's great to have, kind of more for sale owner-occupied housing as well.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, did you have your hand up?
Just real quick, and I apologize, Chris, because I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, but this might be a perfect segue into it and kind of a shameless plug,
Oh.
because we will be talking about this tonight at council. Earlier today, we released a press release in regards for another year of record economic development and growth for the city of Wausau. Chris, do you want to follow up with that real quick? Just let them know what we
Sure.
got.
Well, just again, I think, the city has had, the foresight to implement these plans over the past really decade, but, coming to fruition, especially now with a variety of different types of housing under construction, a near record high in new housing starts in the city, which is also, kind of very important, and 116 million, the second highest year ever in new construction value. So all of these things are obviously important. They go towards, building the foundation for future tax growth in the city. The city's 5% net new construction rate is one of the highest in the state, especially among larger cities and our peer cities. So, it goes to show that we kind of continue to do that, although I would argue, obviously, there's a lot more to do because we have traditionally been behind in our peer communities in the amount of housing downtown. We've been behind in our, kind of peer communities in diversifying the housing options, and that's what we're catching up with, through our strategy and through our, I would argue, wise use of incentives, and, everyone has to kind of plumb that in their own mind if they think it's a wise use of incentives or not, but I think that, versus any peer community, that this level of city participation and this level of investment that's coming to the city is important and is remarkable.
Okay.
And one other thing, too, I'll add, with the economic development and growth that the city has had in the last few years, historic growth, along with low interest rates, this is a reason, because I do know there's some out there that are upset about debt being taken on for infrastructure or public amenities to try to attract residents here. The reason why we're making these investments is an investment in our future, and now is the time to get so much of this infrastructure replaced.
True.
The Band-Aid approach that we did in the past has caught up with us.
Well, we've certainly made some fantastic progress, and I think that, that's evident. Obviously, if we've got 139 million in growth in one year and 116 in another, something good's happening. And so that's certainly
Over
worth
100
celebrating.
million in 18s.
Well, and then when we look at, when we were going through our 2020 budget projections, part of the reason we were able to contain the mill rate increase to just over a penny was growth. That's what kept it all from being worse. And so I think we'll finally start to see some dividends of those actions in the next year or so here as well. So with that, we have not yet taken a motion on this item. Is there a motion to approve this project? Motion by Nutting. Is there a second? Second by Lawrence. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries as well. Item number 6 is just, we just did item 6. So item 7, discussion and possible action regarding sole source purchase for fire station furniture. And you'll see some documentation from the fire department in your packets. We did see a similar request for furnishings at Station 2 a while back, and you'll recall that one of the things the chief went over with us is that when they use the same vendor and their department has the same furniture across the board, when that furniture needs to be swapped out or serviced, they have parts. And it all kind of works together, and they can, sometimes find multifaceted use for that stuff. So does anyone have questions, though, for the fire chief on this item? If there is, we could bring her up.
Move to approve.
If not, okay, we have motion from Nutting to approve. Is there a second? Second by Smith. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries. Item number 8 is discussion and possible action regarding the November General Fund Financial Report, and Mary Ann will walk us through that.
Sure. I think this is an unusual year for us, generally speaking. We will see each department return a little money at the end of the year, and maybe we make a little more money in the revenues, and, that creates a small profit for us. This year is not going to be like that. It reminds me of Aaron Rodgers talking about winning ugly. This is going to be a winning ugly year for us, because while we will make a profit in the general fund, there's going to be some pretty significant differences in our results at the end of the year. So, all along, we've been reporting our revenues and pointing out our stars and some of the dogs. Stars being our investment income. When we're looking at budget to actual for 2019, at this point, we're about $922,000 over budget, meaning we've earned more than we had budgeted. I would imagine that will be about $950,000 by the end of the year. Another one of the stars, as was just pointed out, is in our permit fees. At this point, we're reporting about $200,000 of over budget of permit fees. I think when the year is done, we will be somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 over budget. So those are the main stars in performance of revenues. Probably the biggest concern in expenses continues to be our municipal court fines. You can see through November, we had not yet hit $300,000, which is a decrease from the prior year, and 2018 wasn't a very good year either, so that is continuing to show declines. From the expense side, that's the good part of the win. The ugly part is going to be the expense budget. If you recall, when we looked at budget to actual in 2018, we have about a $32 million general fund budget, and I think we returned about $30,000 net to the general fund. So that's a pretty tight budget. This year, we're probably going to overall lose money in the expenses to actual. We'll show a profit at the end of the year, but our budget to actual will actually show that we've overspent the budget. And of course, the area that is going to be problematic is the engineering budget due to snow removal and, the winter
road
events, yes. So in November, December, you approved a budget amendment of about $300,000 to increase our revenue in interest income and then increase that budget for Public Works by $300,000 to offset some of that winter maintenance. That probably is not going to be enough. We just finished our last payroll processing today that related to 2019, so it was too late to actually run a report for you, but I'll have that at the next meeting. We'll probably have to do another budget amendment. But again, like I said, I'm predicting that we'll make money overall. We'll probably show about a $500,000 profit when all is said and done. It's just that, particularly in Public Works, we're going to see over spending. So that's it as far as
I think
the
that's important for
November
us to
financial-
recognize, and, we're also looking at, a presentation coming up too on road maintenance as far as, how snowstorms are battled and how that process takes place at DPW so that council members can understand that, so that they have good answers to give to the public when they have questions about, why wasn't my street plowed, or can I get some more sand, or whatever that dialogue might be. And I will say that, and I said in SISM this week, or last week, that sometimes it's a little disappointing as someone who works with the DPW crew and sees the pride they take in their work, to read comments on social media and Nextdoor and all these sites saying that the council has cut the budget for road maintenance and that, we don't pay well and that's why we don't have anyone. And separate, read comments posted by residents that say the city of Wausau doesn't plow its streets or doesn't know how to plow and doesn't know how to take care of these things. And all of that is completely not true. And so I've asked, I met with DPW a week ago on Friday, and I met with Eric and Rick, and I asked them to come in and offer some insight so that we all can understand how these processes get done, so that when we are out there interacting with residents and the public, that we can make sure that the facts are out there for how this is done and what gets paid for and how it gets paid for. And we have not, and we now already have bolstered the 2019 street maintenance budget. We're set to bolster it again based on our results for, this early part of this winter season, coming off of the winter from hell in the spring. And so that said, we've not cut that budget for 2020 either. And the way that our crews are out maintaining our streets isn't any different than it's been. They've had some staffing shortages and some recruitment in progress, but their methods have not changed. And their commitment to do a good job for our residents hasn't changed either. So winning ugly, I think, really defines it. I mean, at the end of the day, we'll have money left, but certainly not graceful in getting there. But road maintenance is a big deal. And, it's not just plowing and salting. I mean, look at the pothole war we had to fight in the spring. You couldn't get caught up on those until July. So it's been rough on that stuff. So with that, does anyone have questions for Mary Ann on the general fund financial report? Go ahead.
Not a question, just kind of a compliment. When I keep hearing the word profit, we're not here to make a profit.
Right.
And, department heads, when they are assigned to come up with next year's budget, they go, crystal ball, weather, overtime for fires and homicides, gee, we don't know, And I think if we even come out close on either side, that's phenomenal. I really do. I mean, I know some people say run government like a business. It isn't a business. It's providing a service for which we really, have a lot of unknowns when we set those budgets. So I think it's fine.
Good stuff. Okay, so we'll place Mary Ann's report on file then. The only other item we have left is item 9. And I had asked for us to discuss this item. I guess I'm not advocating for us to support or oppose Bill SB 560 on its face until we talk about it. We get a newsletter every month from the Wisconsin League of Municipalities that kind of tracks these things that are happening legislatively down in Madison that cities might be interested in. This is one that cities might be interested in because it makes changes to how TID financing works, and it makes changes to some of the requirements for us to locally manage our tax increment districts. And so in that situation, often when we see these little bulletins, sometimes in committee, we will pass a resolution and pass it on to council so that our council can speak with one voice, either for or against something. And so sometimes we ask our representatives of the state to support certain legislation, sometimes we ask them to oppose it, but this one has come along and it's got a couple of troubling caveats in it. First, the regulations that cities must go through to manage TIDs and TID districts per the mapping and the Joint Review Board are already fairly stringent. This bill would require a unanimous vote, not a majority vote, a unanimous vote of any Joint Review Board to either increase the size of a TID or extend its life. And this would be statewide, so it has far-reaching impacts for cities like us and many others that would be forced to seek that unanimous vote before they could, perhaps increase the size of a TID or increase its life. And sometimes activity like that can completely change the success of a TID, and it can completely change the revenue stream that comes from it. And so we see that with TID 3. We extended the life of TID 3, and all of the things going up on the riverfront that people love are because of that. And so, if new legislation were to come along that would make it increasingly difficult for Wisconsin cities to do that, does it behoove us to oppose that legislation and seek local control to the greatest extent that we can? And so that's the question I want us to talk about a little bit today. And perhaps Mary Ann has some thoughts on the bill as well.
Well, I think, you summarized it very well. I think that we have used our opportunities to increase the territory. On occasion, we don't use it all the time, and we actually have decreased the size of TID 5 to return funds sooner to the other taxing jurisdictions. And so, creating a higher threshold for approval for the Joint Review Board just seems unreasonable. And then, I think that you all manage our developer agreements. Again, there's, checks and balances because we have to provide that to the Joint Review Board. Of course, the grants have to be in the project plan, so the Joint Review Board is able to review our desire to give developer incentives as part of their approval of the project plan. So it just seems like this is limiting legislation in an area that we already have good checks and balances.
What are your thoughts, committee? I mean, obviously, the council would have to approve this, but do we want to recommend that the council consider speaking with one voice to our state reps on this matter? Go ahead, Dennis.
Well, I've often said that TID tends to become the opiates of municipalities, and I think it has. And I think if we had done a good job, us and other municipalities, in managing them, the state would not have taken a look at them and said, man, maybe we need to rein them in a little bit. So I cannot support this. I think we need to do a better job of managing our TIDs. And I think that if we do, then this legislation wouldn't be necessary. But I don't think we've done a good job, and I think that this is why this is coming before us. Thank you.
Okay. Committee members, others? I guess the only thing that I'd offer as a perspective is that, we keep hearing from our financial planners down at Ellers every year when we bring them in, that we are doing a good job of managing our TIDs and that we are in a good financial situation because of that management. We know that there are municipalities scattered throughout the state that don't do that good of a job. And I struggle to think that we're among those. We heavily utilize TID as a development tool, but I don't believe that we use it irresponsibly. Go ahead, Ms. Lawrence.
Well, I just have to piggyback that. I know when I lost the election in '04, my good friend, Jim Tipple ran on the debt, bad debt. Well, I think that changed when he got in office and could see that you need to increase your tax base. You need to use whatever tool the state lets you have. We don't have sales tax. We don't utilize, wheel taxes. We have room tax, and then the state limited how we can do that, instead of giving us local control on the money that we generate. So, I think we've managed our TIF districts well. I think it's the only tool we have, and I just think it's a legislation to oppose, so I would support the resolution.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, did you have comments to make?
There must be ghosts in the machine because I did not press anything.
I was going to
so,
say, I see Rasmussen's light is on, but she's not over there,
You
so.
know,
I
I
thought
get
maybe it
accused of a
was
lot
you.
of things, but this I did not do,
Okay,
so.
okay. All right, Mr. Martins, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll make a quick comment. Reading this and a little bit of background information from what I could find over the last couple days, I know this proposal would handcuff a lot of what we're able to do in, with financing projects. You know, the allowable cash grants not to exceed 20%, although, you know, seldom do, you know, in the short time I've been here, I don't think we've given out more than 20% on a cash, on a project, so, but the restrictions, you know, on the, for, you know, that the Joint Review Board will pose to us really feel oppressive, that a Joint Review Board needs a unanimous vote in order to make an amendment to the TID. I find that very troubling, and I would support a measure to, you know, support whatever, a resolution opposing this Senate bill.
Okay. Do we have a motion then to approve the resolution and send it forward to council for consideration, likely at the end of this month? Motion by Lawrence, is there a second? Second by Nutting. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, then members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye, opposed? We'll record one opposed.
I was
Mr.
going to
Nutting, go
get,
ahead.
my question is if we could have our state representative potentially be here to give us some more explanation on this. But I do also move that we, as my vote has indicated, that we oppose this legislation. But it would be helpful to find out, there's some thought process behind this. Maybe we could have some
We
clarification.
certainly could inquire about that.
Inquire, but-
Normally, when we pass such a measure, the resolution goes as an attachment with a letter.
Yes.
Normally sent by the mayor, and, you know, just explains our reasoning and encourages them to vote against. I mean, obviously, they're not required to, but at least they know then how Wausau feels
Right.
in terms of the use of such legislation. So, all right, with that, that's
Thank
the
you.
last item on our agenda, so a motion to adjourn would be appropriate.
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Martin, second by Nutting. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.